Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to create hyper-personalized communities using improved audience targeting. My name is David Goldbrenner. I'm the lead for personalization in Salesforce communities. Feel free to get in touch with me with thoughts or questions about personalization in Salesforce communities. Question here, who here uses Lightning Communities? And keep your hand up if you use the audiences feature, the personalization feature. OK, cool. So part of my goal here is to sort of make people understand what they can do with personalization and talk about our roadmap, where we're heading, et cetera. So we've released a lot of great functionality in the last year. I'm not going to go through this in detail because I'll actually demo it. But at the bottom is the main thing I want to point out. The main things that are coming on our roadmap are full API and developer support by spring 20. So personalization will deploy from sandbox to production. And you can assign personalization programmatically, which you can't do right now. Nav menu personalization, one of our biggest requests, so the ability to show a different nav menu to different users based on audience. And record-based criteria, which is the fancy name for being able to vary the experience when you're looking at an object detail page based on fields on that object. So I really think that personalization improves every community. Your community is not complete without it. You want to create distinctions for those critical use cases. So in a service community, guests should see something different than members versus paying customers. In a partner community, gold tier should see something different versus silver, or Eastern Territory versus Western. The whole industry is moving towards personalization. So Forrester says 89% of businesses are investing in it. And Gartner says that it's a key component of a digital experience platform. Our communities are a digital experience platform. And as they say here in their Magic Quadrant, where we were actually a leader this year, it's the delivery of contextualized digital experiences. So if you're not contextualizing the experience in your Lightning community, you're probably missing out on value. So what should you personalize first? Well, if you can't do everything, focus on the high-value use cases. Create a different experience for frequent customers or high-paying customers or gold-tier partners. Create personalization for high-value use cases. If it's really valuable to you to have people register their products, then create an experience for people who haven't registered their products, right? Or for onboarding new community members. All right, just a schematic overview of what you can personalize. Really, you can control the whole look and feel of the page. The branding, the logo, the colors, the fonts, the content. So here we have a partner community. Our resellers are seeing something very different than our repair people, right? Different content, different layouts, different components, different functionality. And it's really easy to do. So here's an actual customer, Gigamon. Here's their homepage for people who have signed into the community but are not paying customers. Right? So this is a typical support community with forums, et cetera. But as soon as you register a product, the top of the community changes, so you're no longer asked to complete your profile. You get this widget here that tells you all about your products, your cases, because you've registered your serial number. And there's even an extra tab here where you can register ideas for their products, et cetera. And this is just done using page variations. Aside from the content, actually creating these different page variations takes 20 minutes, right? Once you have the components ready to go. So let me go right to the demo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with, so Rad Sporting Goods is a fictitious sporting goods retailer. They sell athletic products and they sell a lifestyle, right? So this is what a guest user looks like when they're visiting. This is the guest experience. Generic, urging them to get active. There's this big, pretty hero banner, generic commerce, and an article on a blog post on stretching, right? All of this content is coming. Oops. Thank you for pointing that out. That's what happens when you don't actually exit out of PowerPoint presentation mode. Okay. So starting over, this is the guest experience on Rad Sports. There's a hero, call to action, sort of generic commerce. And some generic content. All of this is coming from our CMS product, by the way, which I also urge you to check out. But now, let's say that we're logged in. And here I'm logged in as Jessica. She's an experienced marathon runner. and a frequent customer. And she's seeing a completely different experience. Different logo, different hero banner, different call out to register for a marathon, completely marathon-centric content, different layout, right? And then here's the more generic content. So we've completely customized her, personalized her experience, and I created those two variations really in about an hour, and that included having to create some CMS content. So now let's hop over to our administrator logged into the community builder, and we're going to take a look at how that differentiated experience was created. So I'm going to click here to this page variation. So this is just your home page in the community. I've created two variations. Again, you can see this is all CMS content. I've created two variations, one for guests, one for marathon runners, and this is what Gigamon did, right? It's really easy to do. Just different CMS content, different page layout, different theme layout, actually. Both pages are on different theme layouts, which is a really powerful feature. And now, how have I pointed them to the audiences? Well, if you look at page variations here, you can see that Home for Marathon Runners is pointed to an experienced marathon runner's audience, and Home for Guests is pointed to a guest's audience. Now, let's take a look at how these audiences are actually built, and this is the hyper-personalized part of this lecture. Right? Let's take a look at how I hyper-personalize this audience. So you have a lot of different criteria that you can choose from, all based on Salesforce data. And the top one here, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually looking for users who are experienced marathon runners and are either, using custom boolean logic here, are either in a high spending area or have demonstrated a high spend with RAD. And I'm offering them this marathon runner's experience. So you've got the boolean logic here that's new in spring, just last release. This is also new. This criteria is looking at the user's custom permissions. You can also look at standard permissions. So in this case, I've given her access to a race training and tracking app on my platform, and she gets that access through a custom permission, which is assigned through a permission set. And I want to give her a visual experience to match that functionality. And so here I'm actually looking for the presence of that permission. And if she has that, then she matches this audience and she sees the differentiated experience. In this criteria, I'm looking at her location. In this criteria, I'm looking at a field on her user, actually on her contact object. So this is really cool. I can use any field on her user object or any object I can traverse to from her user object. Now, as a tip, you can add lookups to these objects. For example, here, test custom object is a lookup field, and that allows me to further traverse to this test custom object. So I can access almost any field related to this user as long as I can start from the user object, and that allows me to differentiate my audiences based on almost any criteria in Salesforce. Now let's pop out of this for a second. So we just talked about differentiating page variations and how you do it with audiences. Well, there's two other types of personalization that I want you to know about. The first is component visibility, right? So let's say I want to show Jessica here a call out, a call to action to register for a conference, but I only want to show it to her if she hasn't already registered. So basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a CMS component here with the content, really easy to do. You just saw me using CMS, which is pretty cool. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to assign an audience just to that component. And I'm going to assign an audience of people who are not registered for Rad World. And then I'm going to publish this. And as soon as this is done, I'm going to flip over to back to Jessica's experience here, and I'm going to refresh it. And she's going to have that component. Now, when do you use a page variation versus a component visibility? Use a page variation if you want to make major overall changes to the page. Use component visibility if you just want a single component to either show or not show. Right? This is really cool. Now, before she gets to that marathon content, I have a call to action. This is really high value. And as soon as she registers for Rad World, next time she comes, she'll no longer match that audience and that component won't show up. Now, the last type of personalization is branding sets. So here you can see I have two different branding sets. And again, this is the default. And this one is the one that Jessica sees. It's targeted to her audience, marathon runners. and it has a different logo, a different color scheme, etc. So hopefully earlier on that slide when I showed you how you can really change everything in the community, you see now how you can do that using the triad of page variations, component visibility, and branding sets. All right. Now, I also want to talk about some actual practical tips and tricks. Hopefully, you already saw some in the audience that I showed, but I want to go back and show a few others. So I'm going to come back to my audience manager here. Guests. How do you identify guests? Well, a lot of people go and they look for a guest user profile. Makes a lot of sense. There actually is a community guest user profile, but it doesn't show up here. The way you find a guest is you look for user type equals guest. Right? And that audience will then fire for unauthenticated users, and you can reliably capture unauthenticated users and give them a different experience. Another one, record types. This audience, you'll notice, is pretty interesting. There's actually no criteria up here related to the user, but there is a record type-based criteria here. So this is kind of, we're overloading the audience concept here a little bit. With this audience, if I visit a chatter group, and chatter groups are Salesforce objects, they can have record types. If I visit a chatter group and it happens to have a power group record type, I'm not going to show this, but the user will actually see a completely different page variation for that chatter group. So if you're on any object detail, chatter groups, opportunity detail, product detail, account detail, lead detail, you can completely vary the visual experience based on the record type of that object. And what we have on the roadmap is to be able to completely vary the experience based on any field on those objects. So if you have a product and it costs more than $100, you can show a different experience when looking at that product than if the product costs less than $100. Now, the next tip and trick I want to talk about here is, so you'll notice, actually, let me go back here. There is an audience called new users. Okay, and I'm checking a field on the user object called rad community new user. And my goal here is to capture all users who have been members of the community for less than 30 days. And let's say they're less than 30-day members. I want to urge them to onboard or something else. Well, how do I know that they're a member for less than 30 days? Unfortunately, you can't put formulas into this audience editor yet. Maybe we'll get there, but right now we don't have that capability. But using the platform, I can do it using a pretty simple workaround. So first, actually, I have a process here in Process Builder. It took me 10 minutes to set up. By the way, I have everything I'm saying here, I have captured in a tips and tricks document. If you just, I should have created a link to it, but if you actually just email me, again, I'll show my email address at the end, I will send you the tips and tricks document. So here I've created a process where every time someone becomes a network member in the Rad Sports community, we're actually filling in a field on their user object. Let's see, where is that? Filling in a field on their user object. Let's see if I can go to this quickly. So we're filling in a field on their user object called rad community join date. Simple as that. Now, rad community new user is actually a boolean formula field that just looks at rad community join date and sees is it more than 30 days ago or not. And then again, in the audience, I'm simply just pivoting on that rad community new user boolean, right? So again, hyper-personalized, pretty much anything you can capture on a record related to the user you can use to differentiate an audience. And meet all those valuable use cases. So that's actually the demo. Now I want to return to PowerPoint and give you guys a little bit more on our roadmap. So coming up winter, we are going into pilot for public personalization APIs, as well as audience deployment for new orgs only. So it's pilot and it's for new orgs. But if you are in the pilot program and you have a new org, you can programmatically, you'll be able to programmatically do all of the personalization that I showed you in the UI. Also, all the personalization that you do in the sandbox will deploy through MD API. You just go to Workbench, you retrieve it, it deploys to production. Coming in spring 220, we will GA all of that stuff, the public personalization APIs and the deployment. We will allow you to personalize the nav menu. So just like you could personalize page variations, as I just showed you, you'll be able to personalize the whole nav menu. We'll have the record-based criteria where you can vary the experience based on data on the record. And we're going to scale up from 100 to 1,500 audiences. So if you want to run a script and create 1,000 audiences for 1,000 different zip codes, you'll be able to do that. I want to talk a bit about the value of the API. So first of all personalization will deploy. Audiences can be created programmatically. So let's say you create a record for a new geographical location that you're servicing. You can now automatically, through Process Builder, create a matching audience. Lightning community pages, components, and branding sets will be able to be created programmatically. You can target audiences to those pages, components, and branding sets programmatically. So everything I did in the builder right here, you'll be able to do through the API. And eventually, targeting of audiences to other Salesforce data will eventually be possible as well. So let's say you have a custom component and you want it to show different data for a bronze audience versus a gold audience. You'll be able to use our personalization APIs to make that happen as well. And finally, because hopefully we're technical, I want to talk about a little bit about how those personalization APIs are going to work. So this is what personalization looks like from what I just did in the builder, right? I go and I create some variations of the home page. I create some variations of the branding set. And I set a component to be visible or not. So maybe if I'm a silver visitor, I see a component that shows me how to earn gold status, right? Well, how is this going to look to the API developer? This is what it's going to look like. The Lightning community you will build, and it will have defaults. It will have a default homepage, a default branding set, and it will have components that perhaps are hidden by default. And then you will create these site.com objects using the site.com API, which we'll be going to pilot, called experience variations. And those experience variations will tell the site to change its default behavior. So for example, this variation here might tell the site to use a different page variation, maybe that marathon runner page variation instead of the default. And then finally, you'll call a connect API or an MD API, which will actually point an audience to what we call a target. And the target will be created, and that will in turn point to this experience variation so that at runtime, when the user logs in, we'll recognize that they're silver. This target will implement itself, will activate, and it will tell site.com to implement this experience variation. This is the JSON for the experience variation. You'll just go and type this in. You'll give it a developer name, and then you'll tell it what route. So route is just a fancy name for like home page, contact support page, etc. And then you'll tell it the ID of the actual page variation that you want to vary. Right? So this bundle here is telling the Lightning community how to change its default behavior. And then you'll call this connect API endpoint. You'll take the ID of the audience, maybe marathon runners. You'll take the dev name of that variant bundle. You'll put in a group name. That just specifies what part of the site you're varying. It has to be there. Is it the home page? Is it the branding sets? Is it a component visibility, etc.? And once that call is made, in the UI, you will see this audience targeted to that particular page variation, just like I did a few moments ago in the demo. So that's it. That's current functionality, roadmap, and then this is actually other Community Cloud sessions, all of which have already happened. So I'll leave this up here just as a reminder of what you may have missed. And I think it looks like we got a minute, so I guess I can take some quick questions, but thank you all again for coming. And let me actually flip back to my email in case you guys want to get in touch with me for any reason. Do you have any questions while I'm flipping here? No questions? Okay, well again, I can't emphasize enough personalization. It's there, it's easy to use, it adds a lot of value. I really think it should be part of the build-out strategy for any community. Identify the high-value use cases and implement some personalization. That's it, thank you very much.